Sheriff Elam Cottrell rode out to the Cutright place south of Buckhannon on October 12, 1894, when the air was thin enough to hear a gate rattle a quarter-mile away. He found the house at the elbow of Brushy Fork, a low clapboard with one crooked porch post and a sycamore rubbing the roof. Inside lived Ezra Cutright, 48, his wife Lida, 2 sons, Hiram and Absalom, a daughter called Mercy Ann, and a nephew, Orrin, who never lifted his eyes. Tell me your city and the exact time on your clock right now. One question drives the file. How many of the names written in their family Bible did not belong to the family at all? When Cottrell reached for the cellar latch, he said he could smell vinegar and iron through the oak. The house was clean in every ordinary way. Chair seats braided, 2 quilts folded with the points aligned, 11 canning jars on the shelf. But the latch film left gray on his thumb like stove soot. He told his deputy Mose Tenney to step back and count the stairs. There were 17 steps cut from stone, each lip damp as if licked. At the bottom, his lantern showed him a room 3 men across and 5 men long, walls chinked with river lime. On a platform against the far wall stood what the sheriff later called an altar, but was in truth a table of bone, 6 femurs, cross-pinned with awl holes, and a slab of sandstone laid over them to make a top. He counted the sigils because counting steadied him. 15 carvings, each a circle knifed into the slab with 3 notches at the rim, north, south, west. The notches were shallow, no deeper than a thumbnail. They repeated on the door lintel, 3 by 3, then again on the wooden bucket to know the corner. Between the altar and the drain ran a trough chipped into the floor, 4 inches wide and an arm's length long, sloping toward a clay pipe that disappeared east. Cottrell set his boot heel at the high end and watched lantern light ripple in a film that wasn't water. The smell made his tongue pull back in his mouth. Vinegar and iron. He ordered Tenney to bring the coroner, Dr. Leander Voss, from Ludlow Street. Voss arrived with a canvas satchel and a face like wax fruit. He touched the braided hair in the wall with a matchstick and said only, "Human," and then, after a minute, "2 donors. See the change in thickness." Upstairs, the family Bible lay open on a table with a bowl of boiled potatoes gone cool beside it. The Bible was heavy, 9 pounds by the doctor's guess. He lifted it in both hands and grunted, and the names on the flyleaf ran in one neat column. Ezra, Lida, Hiram, Absalom, Mercy Ann, Orrin. Under them were 5 dates written in different inks. 4 clustered in March of years ending with a 2 or a 7, one alone in a June no one remembered. The sheriff was a man who liked a list. He made a second column in his casebook, a narrow ledger with a scuffed calf binding, and wrote objects instead of names. Oak latch with soot, 17 steps, bone table, 15 circles with 3 notches each, trough 4 inches wide, hair braid 7 inches, bucket with notches, pipe to east. He added, last, smell, vinegar plus iron, underlined twice. Neighbor Sella Post had sent the sheriff. She lived 0.6 mile north and could see the Cutright roof from her garden rows, 12 wide, 6 long. For 2 weeks, she'd seen a blue light at the sycamore at odd hours, and on the last Saturday, 5 figures walking from house to creek with something slung between 2 poles. She told Cottrell, "They go in 2 and 2, and the little one in the middle did not plant his feet like kin." Absalom wore a gray coat with the buttons pulled off and sewed back on with wire. He kept his hands in his pockets, but Cottrell had seen rope burns before. The bands around Absalom's wrists were narrow and bright as if newly scrubbed, the left cut angled and the right cut straight. When asked about the cellar, Absalom said, "We pickle meat down there," and shrugged. Doctor. Voss measured the trough and then measured the bucket. The bucket held 1.5 gallons and had a finger-width lip. On its underside was carved the same 3-notched circle, burned in with a nail heated red. Voss leaned into the drainage pipe and scraped the inside with a knife for a sample. On the blade, under the lantern, a black sheen looked back, thin as lacquer. The minister got involved because he could not help it. Reverend Obed Graves had been at Sago Chapel 12 years and had married the older boy, Hiram, to Lida's younger cousin in 1882. He remembered the bride's name, Temperance Keever, and the way she had held her veil in a fist the whole time. She had died 3 winters later in a fever without a doctor. At her burial, someone had hung a goat bell from the maple by the fence, and it rang twice with no wind. 3 in the morning is when the sycamore starts its knocking, so Sella said, but the sheriff did not favor times of night. He left that to stories. What he believed he had was this: a cellar arranged for something that was not food, a trough laid to a pipe that had no business leaving a house, and a family that kept to its own blood so closely their names doubled back in the book like a creek in flood. Most Tenny walked to the creek bank to see where the pipe ran. He found a clay mouth in the red dirt 3 feet from the waterline, with a collar of stones and a smell a man knows if he's ever been kicked in the teeth. The mud below it was stained dark. He put his finger into the ooze and brought it up. Shining, then washed it off and spat, once, same as if he'd said a prayer. A pattern is nothing until it has at least 3 points. The first was the hair in the wall, the second was the circles with the 3 notches. The third came from the schoolmaster, Jotham Kittle, who taught 13 children 2 miles east and kept tally by beans in a jar, 1 per head each day. He said that on a Wednesday in early spring he counted 12 beans by noon, and then, without anyone leaving or arriving, found 14 beans at day's end. He had not made that mistake before or since. Kittle said that Hiram brought rabbits in a sack to the schoolyard sometimes, 6, 8 at once, to trade for chalk or lamp oil. The rabbits had their necks broken clean, no blood. But once Kittle found in Hiram's coat a handful of string tied in a knot he did not recognize. 3 loops, 3 short ends. The knot looked like a hooked letter, something between a Y and a 3. He threw it in the fire and heard it pop. The midwife had a memory the rest would not talk about. Temperance Kerr, Tem, to save breath, had delivered Mercy Ann in a hot week 12 years ago and said the baby came slick and silent with a cord around her neck knotted twice and a 3rd loop only pretended. Tem cut the loops with a bone-handled knife and the baby gasped. Tem kept that knife in a blue jug by her bed afterward and said it turned the water rusty some mornings without reason. If you stood on the rise behind Alban Teeter's corn and looked down at the Cutright place at sunset, you would see a dark shining at the cellar window, a square no bigger than a pair of books laid side by side. Alban did that on a dare from his oldest boy and saw, on 3 separate evenings, a hand lift inside the square and set down a bowl. On the 3rd evening, the bowl was red clay with a band of 3 notches. After that, he stopped going up the hill. The sheriff liked things that could be weighed. He put the bone table at 28 pounds because 2 men could lift it, but 3 made it easy. He put the hair at less than 1 ounce because it didn't pull on his finger when he teased it. He put the smell at everywhere because he carried it home in his mustache, and his wife asked him if he'd been in the tannery. That first night he sealed the cellar door with 2 nails, both driven left-handed, so he would remember which way he had made them. He signed his name on the lintel with a stub of carpenter's pencil and drew 3 short lines under it to spoil the circles. Then he took the family to town because Mercy Ann would not quit shivering, and Orrin had a cut on his lip 3/4 of an inch long that had crusted into the skin. At the jailhouse, which had 4 cells and a pot-bellied stove with a crack down the side, Eunice Pringle from the courthouse brought paper for statements. Ezra wrote with a surprisingly neat hand. He kept his letters short and upright and did not blot once. "We keep to ourselves," he wrote. "We gather at season. We wash with vinegar. We don't hurt our own." When he finished, he folded the paper into exact quarters and held it until the skin at his knuckles whitened. The first anchor came when Cottrell went back to the cellar alone before dawn, lantern in his left hand and his right around the butt of his Colt. The nails holding the door looked undisturbed, but the house had a new quiet, a kind that felt like the moment right before a pan lid blows. He took each stair slow, counting under his breath, and spoke the numbers without thinking, 7, 8, 9, the way a man might steady a skittish horse. On the floor, he found footprints that had not been there, bare, narrow, 4 of them, heel and ball and second toe deeper than the others. They led from the stair to the altar and back, a track 2 feet apart as if the walker had been careful not to brush the trough. The bone table looked the same until he noticed, on the sandstone slab, 3 shallow depressions he had not catalogued. 1 the size of a cup bottom, 1 the size of a thumbnail, 1 a straight line 2 inches long. He lifted the bucket and smelled fermented apple, sharp as if a jug had been uncorked in his throat. He realized the vinegar tang he'd named kept company, with something sweeter, cider that had gone over. Under the bucket lay a strip of cloth, 9 inches long, torn from a dressum and rolled tight. Inside, the roll was a thin twig, carved with the 3-notched sign and stained along one edge dark as clove. Cottrell held the twig to the lantern. The edge that was dark looked like it had been drawn along a blade. He rubbed the stain with his thumb, and it came away. Light rust. He did not need a doctor to tell him what kind of rust it was. He slid the twig into his coat and listened. The house above made a sound then, not the creak of wood or wind, but a hum, like a mouth closed over a word. 3 notes, low, high, low. It stopped before he could decide if it was a voice. He moved to the drain. He had Tenny's knife and scraped again, this time deeper, twisting the blade to cut a curl of the clay pipe. The curl came away slick and heavier than its size should. Permit? 50 grains, perhaps? And he dropped it into a matchbox. Then he took the lantern to the wall and looked close at the hair braid mortared into place. On one strand near the end, tied so small it could not be seen unless you had the light at a slant, was a knot of red thread. He blew out the lantern and stood in the dark, the way a man will when he wants to hear past his own fear. The cellar exhaled a cool breath that smelled of damp lime and the copper edge of a penny held on the tongue too long. Upstairs, a board ticked. He climbed the 17 steps without counting. Back in town, Dr. Voss had prepared slips that spoke plain. He had pressed a piece of linen into the trough stain and left it to dry on his desk until it stiffened. He wrote, "Blood present in drainage channel beyond doubt," and listed no Latin. He had measured Mercy Ann's neck and wrists, and found old marks the size of a man's little finger. He said to the sheriff, "Not the first time for bindings," and then, "No broken bones." His handwriting leaned forward as if chasing something. Reverend Graves, for his part, brought a diary none of us expected him to have. He said he'd found it in the parsonage, but later he admitted he had pried it from under a floorboard in the Cutright front room, the board where the rocker always sat. The diary was bound in oilcloth, about as big as a man's hand, and it began with a list of moons and the word season written sideways down the margin. Graves did not read it aloud like scripture. He walked as he spoke, back and forth, from stove to window. The entries were not filled with the vanity of a man who loves his own thoughts, but with tasks. Sharp bone, vinegar made, tallow rendered, girl washed. Then, 3 lines later, not ours. He looked up after those 2 words and did not say the rest. The next 2 names came from beyond the ridge. Corin Squires, the blacksmith, at Lawrence, said Hiram had traded for a hog scraper 6 weeks back and asked if a slot could be cut in it narrow as a knife back. Squires had never done that to a scraper before, but did it, 2 passes with a file, making a mouth just 3/16 wide. He thought nothing of it until the sheriff asked him if a mouth that narrow could pour neat. Midwife Tem Kerr told the sheriff that Lida had asked for alum twice in 1 week and borax the week after, saying she kept losing a dye and needed to fix it. Tem sold her the alum in a twist of paper, 1 ounce each time, and a lump of borax the size of a hen's egg. Tem's house had a cat that slept on the stove and 1 ear that never bent. The ear twitched when she said alum because she had never sold so much to one woman in 1 month. Selah Post returned with a story she had saved because it made her throat tighten. 2 summers ago, she had walked down to Buckhannon with 11 eggs in a basket, and on the way back, heard from the creek below the road a counting song sung off key. 1 for the worm, 2 for the stone, 3 for the king in the mountain, the voice sang, always landing wrong. When she peered over the bank, she saw Hiram with his boots off, shoes and socks set side by side like 2 little boats, and a line of flat stones arranged in a 3-notched circle around a glass jar. The second anchor came when a witness, finally, saw a pattern from a distance and did not break it by moving. It was Alvin Teeter again, and this time he wasn't on a dare but hunting a stray hog, a gilt with a torn ear he wanted back. He'd gone up the ridge at dusk when the light was a coin held flat, and he lay down behind a windfallen trunk to rest. From there, the Cutright place lay out like a map, each outbuilding a square, the sycamore a black candle. He noticed first the lantern positions, 1 in the kitchen, 1 on the porch rail, 1 swinging from the sycamore low branch, and 1 in the cellar window. The 4 lights made a rhombus that wasn't an accident. The cellar light burned the steadiest. Albin listened, and after a while heard that same 3-note hum the sheriff had named, low, high, low, with a pause of 2 breaths. Between each, he measured the pause with his thumb against a stick, a notch per breath, 8 notches to the line before he lost patience. Movement followed the sound. 2 figures came from the house, with a 3rd between them. The middle one was small, child-size, Albin said, but with a gait that belonged to a man with feet bound a shuffle instead of a step. They went down the side of the house, and the cellar light bloomed brighter. Albin squeezed his eyes so the glare wouldn't blind him and waited. He saw shadows on the cellar ceiling as if cast from below. 5 bars, then a circle, then a hand-raised palm out. The hum rose. He thought for a second there was more than 1 voice, 3 men singing close, and then a woman's tone threaded between them, higher, the way a kettle's whistle thinly goes between plow, horse, and harness clink. Albin kept still until his neck cramped and his nose started to run. He wiped it on his sleeve and waited longer. He saw the hand again, this time holding up a small object, and because his angle was low, he could see only that it was not a cup, but something with a handle, a ladle perhaps, and the way it tipped made the light catch along one side as if it were polished. A minute later, the porch light went out, then the kitchen light, and soon only the cellar light burned. It went out last, and when it did, Albin heard, faint as a coin dropped into a pocket, a bell ring twice. In the morning, down by the fence where he'd lain, Albin found a goat bell without a clapper. 3 notches had been cut into its rim with a sharp blade, not evenly spaced, but in a cluster as if the carver wanted them to speak together. Albin hung the bell by his shed door, and it never made a sound. Dr. Voss wanted numbers he could own. He took a pint bottle from his satchel and filled it at the creek downstream of the pipe mouth. He shook it and watched the bubbles rise. He added to it a powder he kept wrapped in tissue. The liquid darkened as if a cloud had passed in front of the sun. "Protein," he said. "Not hog." He drew short letters like a man writing under an avalanche. The diary from the floorboard began to make its own case. Graves read a page that started with "Season at creek mouth. White rope, cider strong, cut at notch." And every line after seemed to tell no story at all until it did. "Mercy washed after. Vinegar," it said. "Not ours." Then later, 2 pages. "Boy from 10 Mile with ear tore, no kin name given." He whispered, "Lord," and closed the book for a breath. If there was a confession, it was Ezra's to give. He asked for paper again and wrote in silence for 23 minutes by the courthouse clock, the only mention of time we kept because it fits the fact that his hand did not slow. He folded the paper, sealed it with red wax fresh from Eunice's desk candle, and wrote on the outside, "For vault." He asked that it not be opened until his children were set in a safe place. The vault at the courthouse was an iron belly inside a brick wall, door a half-inch thick with a star wheel on its face. Eunice set Ezra's sealed paper in a pigeonhole, between a deed for a hayfield and an oil lease nobody could prove. She locked the vault with one turn and wrote the date on a slip she kept pinned under the window sash. When she handed the key to Sheriff Cottrell, she said, "It now belongs to you," and he tucked it into the small pocket sewn into his vest. The third anchor came not as a quiet reading, but as a motion, a week after the vault swallowed Ezra's seal. We were in the clerk's room at noon when a man from French Creek named Ash came in with a question about landlines. The room was warm. It was one of those fall summers, and the window stood open 3 inches. While Eunice wrestled with a map, someone in the hallway asked for her by name, and she stepped out. Cottrell kept his eyes on the vault door, a habit the way a mother listens for a child. He noted nothing wrong until he stood up to stretch and saw the star wheel trembling as if a heavy wagon had passed in the street. He crossed the room in 3 steps and spun the wheel left. It stopped early. He spun it right. It caught. The lock gave with a click he did not like, a brighter sound than it should have had, like a bottleneck broken, not the dull tongue of iron. Inside the vault, the pigeonholes looked undisturbed, deeds stacked neat, leases folded like shirts, a ledger lying open to show rents paid in June. Ezra's sealed confession was not in its slot. Eunice came back with a smudge on her cuff and said, "What?" without understanding until she saw Cottrell's face. The window was still up 3 inches. The sill had a mark on it like a fingernail drawn hard enough to leave white wood. On the floor 2 feet from the vault lay a red wax crescent, paper stuck to one side. When Cottrell lifted it, the paper came away, leaving the crescent on his thumb. He tasted iron without putting anything in his mouth. He had not lost keys. He had not left the door open. The thing was gone anyway. The public scene that followed began as a Sunday and became something else. Sago Chapel could hold 80 if pressed. That morning they fit 119 by counting heads and allowing children to sit on the steps. Reverend Graves did not preach first. He set the diary on the pulpit and then reached into a satchel and pulled out the family Bible from the Cutright table, because when the sheriff had removed the family to town, he had taken that too. Graves opened to the flyleaf and pointed at the 6 names. He read them in order and then showed the congregation a thin scrape on the page under Mercy Ann, a space where an erasure had been attempted. With the light coming from the high windows, you could see a ghost line below, another name, once written and rubbed to a blur. He said, "We do not know what was there. We know only that someone tried to make it never have been." He pulled from the satchel a small glass jar with a lid. Inside lay the twig the sheriff had found rolled in the cloth under the bucket. He set the jar on the pulpit, and it caught the light, showing the stained edge like a dog's ear. He said, "A sign is not power. A sign is a reminder." Then he lifted the jar with 2 fingers and showed them the 3 notches carved halfway down like teeth. In the rear pew, Absalom stood and stared, and someone gasped because his fingernails were rimmed dark as if he had been working in a barrel of cider. He curled his hands into fists, but the dark remained. Tem Kerr, sitting 2 rows forward, reached without looking and lifted Mercy Ann's hair from her collar. There, at the back of the girl's neck, where a cross might hang, were 2 pale bands and a third shadow of a band, as if a loop had been placed and then loosened at the last moment. Mose Tenney, who did not sing in church, said under his breath, "Now!" He stepped to the aisle with the quiet of a man who has stepped into water cold enough to cut. Ezra did not move. Ezra was a man who had always known what to do with his hands and now left them at his sides. Graves picked up the diary and held it open. He read one more line, just 6 words. 3 taken. 2 names not ours. The courthouse filled with papers that week, but we kept our words short. Dr. Voss wrote measurements and cut pieces of linen into strips 8 inches by 2, labeling not with cold numbers, but with places. Trough, bucket, pipe mouth, altar. He signed with a black pencil that left a shine. He sent to Clarksburg for a man with reagents who could tell hog from man without guesswork, and the man sent back a slip reading human origin present, in letters straight as tines. We walked the creek for 1.7 miles in each direction, counted exactly 13 places where the earth had been cut and filled. We put iron rods into each and hit rock at 2 feet, or hit nothing at all. At the 3rd cut, we touched a square of wood, 8 inches by 8, pegged with 2 dowels. When we lifted it, the hole below stank of cider again and iron too, and inside it we found a leather strap looped twice and a 3rd loop only begun. We followed Orrin, the nephew, when he went to the privy at dusk. He had things in his pockets he never used. Smooth stones, a bent button, a length of string 3 feet long with 3 knots evenly spaced. When we asked him what the knots meant, he said, "They make a song," which was not an answer. He tied one of the knots to the latch and watched it hold the door open just enough to let the wind whistle. We tied the string to a fence post and plucked it. It made the same low, high, low we had heard from the hill. When they searched Ezra's room, they found, under the tick, a sack of listings from the Buckhannon board, advertisements clipped and saved for no reason anyone could name. Each clipping had a corner snipped off into a curve. In one pocket of the sack, there was a lump of beeswax with 3 notches cut into one edge. A smell came from the beeswax, vinegar and iron. Sheriff Cottrell drew, in the margin of his casebook, a map of the Cutright place with a line for the pipe and dots for the cellar posts. In the bottom corner, he sketched the 3-notched circle 4 times, and then, striking out the middle notch in 2 of them, wrote, "2 names, not ours." He sent a rider to French Creek to ask if anyone had reported a child missing, and the rider came back with a note. None. That meant nothing. Not all names got written down. The schoolmaster Kittle came with one more bean count. He poured a jar of white beans onto the table, 57 of them, and said, "At term start we had 18. After 3 weeks, we had 17. In week 5, we had 19. I do not make mistakes of this kind." He pointed at a smear on the tabletop left by someone's thumb and rubbed at it with his cuff. He looked at his cuff after and made a face. Vinegar and iron. We went out again at night, not because we believed we would catch a man in a wicked act, but because standing in the dark had become part of the work. Beneath the sycamore, the bark wore a polish where something had been rubbed against it, a band. 2 inches wide, wrapped around the trunk at a height of 5 feet, as if a rope had been pulled tight there many times. On the ground below lay a cluster of twigs bound with red thread the size of a walnut. We took the twigs apart and found nothing inside them but more twig. We burned them, and when they popped, the smell was so sweet it burned our throats a little, like when cider goes to vinegar and comes back around. You could live 100 years and not hear a sheriff say the words blood sacrifice in Upshur County. Cottrell did not say them. He wrote offerings once and did not underline it. He looked at Ezra and saw a man who had grown used to thinking his work, whatever it was, kept his house safe from something worse. He did not see a madman. He saw a man with a list. That made it harder. We gave numbers to the dead we had not found. 3 notches, 3 loops on the string, 3 depressions on the altar, the song Low, High, Low, the goat bell ringing twice, when it had no clapper. The jar at the creek with flat stones arranged in a ring of 3, the diary line with 3 taken. It is foolish to let a number drive you. It is foolish not to notice. Graves came to the jail in the evening with his collar undone and asked to see Mercy Ann. He sat with her at the table and slid a piece of paper across it. On the paper he had drawn a circle and cut 3 notches into its rim with his pen. She looked at it without blinking. He turned the paper 90 degrees. She did not turn her head. He said, "What is it?" She said, "Door," and pushed the paper back to him with a finger that had a ring of raw skin at the base. When Graves left, he said to the sheriff, "They think doors keep danger out. These are doors they push someone through." He did not ask for a prayer. He asked for time. We dug in the orchard. The trees were not old, trunks the thickness of a man's thigh, and every one had 3 rocks set at its base like a footstool. Under one rock, the middle, we found the corner of a cloth bound with tar. Inside lay bones small enough to make a man sit down before he fell. Dr. Voss said, "Dog, maybe?" and then, "No," and taped his mouth shut with his own lips. He did what he had to do, and we did not watch. When he finished, he said, "One jaw says infant, the other is not." He did not say what the other was. The diary said, "Not ours again," and we heard it this time as an admission of what we were looking at, and not as a feint. There are ways in which a family can be its own world and still not contain everything it touches. The fourth anchor came as a trial that was not a trial. We had to do something public because the county wanted its noise. We set up 3 tables in the courthouse, the ones with the legs that fold, and laid out the things that told the story without a single witness. The bucket, the jar with the carved twig, the beeswax with the notches, the diary open to the line that mentioned 3 taken, the linen strips stiff with iron, the goat bell without its clapper. We put the Bible last, flyleaf facing out like a face. At a window. The room smelled like dust and boots and the faint high edge of cooked sugar from the wagon outside that sold peanuts. Then the vinegar and iron filled it, not from any one object, but from all of them together, like chords a man hears when he has learned how to listen. People came and stood in a semicircle like a choir. A woman put her hand to her throat and did not move it. A farmer named Dake asked, "What do you call it?" And Sheriff Cottrell said, "I call it a room made wrong," and that was good enough for him. Another man who had come from beyond Tallmansville asked, "Whose is the hair?" And we told him we didn't know, and he went quiet like someone whose own house had a secret under it. Graves said the prayer at the end because the crowd would not leave without one, and the prayer did nothing to the smell. Ezra sat in the second row for the entire showing. He did not look left or right, and barely looked at the table. When Graves read the diary line about 3 taken, Ezra rubbed his thumb and first finger together as if feeling for a thread too fine to see. When the people started to talk, at once he stood and said, "I told you we wash with vinegar," and no one laughed and no one moved toward him either. Eunice counted the people under her breath. 123 had come, 42 had looked at the Bible twice, 20 had touched the goat bell as if it could ring for them. 6 asked to hold the jar with the twig in it, and only 1 did. 2 men stood by the door and did not come in. Numbers steadied her the way they steadied the sheriff. We did not hang Ezra. We did not even sentence him because the law we had could not see what we could smell. The words for what he had done did not lay close to the words in the code. Dr. Voss, who wanted facts he could hold like a rail, had them, and even he could not hitch them to a charge clean enough to hold. The county attorney said, "Unlawful disposal," and then frowned because it sounded like trash. What we could do, we did. We took Mercy Ann to stay with Selah Post, who put her in a bed between 2 windows and left them open an inch because she could not stand shut rooms. We took Orrin to Kittles, who set him to count beans the rest of the term and put a slate in his hands. We let Hiram and Absalom sit in a cell together and let them hum whatever song they wanted, as long as they kept their hands where we could see them. In the night after the showing, the sycamore by the Cutright porch split a limb in calm air and dropped it exactly between the porch steps and the cellar door. The limb measured 12 feet 7 inches, heavy enough to crush a pig. It lay there 3 days until a boy with a mule dragged it away. Under the limb, the dirt was bare but for 3 circles scratched with a stick, one overlapping the other, as if someone had hurried. The casebook ends not with a sentence, but with a measure. Cellar door sealed with 3 nails, the sheriff wrote. House to be burned after removal of all materials of ordinary use. He signed his name, drew the 3 lines again, and this time did not strike any out. The house did burn. The sycamore did not. The place where the cellar had been, heaped up in a low mound, like a back under a quilt. We kept the goat bell without a clapper. It lives now in a drawer that smells of paper and leather, and every 3rd spring when the humidity rises, it leaves a ring on the wood so round it looks traced. Graves took his diary back and locked it in a chest. Eunice watched the chest's key until she died and left it tied with red thread to the bottom of a scarf. The question that opened everything stayed open. We had names we could write without hurting anyone. Ezra, Lydda, Hiram, Absalom, Mercy Ann, Orrin. We had 2 unmade names that the diary said were not ours. We had a goat bell with notches, a jar with a carved twig, a beeswax lump scarred. With a sign, a trough in a cellar, a smell that returned and returned until we knew it as well as we knew our own kitchens. How many victims lay beyond the family line? 3 notches, say 3. The diary says 2. The bell rang twice for a woman who died of fever, and we were fools to count that among the offerings, but the mind counts whatever recurs. We can close the trail this far. The cellar was a ritual room. The bone table, the carved signs, the vinegar wash, the drainage cut to the creek, all of it made the work clean in a way that had nothing to do with soap. Dr. Voss found human blood where no butcher would need it. Graves found in the diary the word taken paired with the word not, and when you read the lines with your jaw set, you feel the same small drop your stomach makes boarding a ferry. The sealed confession was placed in the vault and vanished without turning a lock. Someone else believed in that room enough to steal the words that named it. Why did no one close the door when the notches began to appear on more than one object? If everyone could smell vinegar and iron on a man's hands, why did we call it cider and let him pass? The braid of hair in the cellar wall is gone, burned with the house, but on the shelf where the goat bell rests, the red thread knot sometimes, freckles the wood with a rust tint, 3 spots close together, like a mouth that has chosen not to speak.